Good afternoon and welcome to 365 Days of Amazing Stories with Theo Mayer. Here we are today, 136, and I'm continuing with a story from 1001 Arabian Nights, The Merchant and the Genie. Now, you might remember that Scheherazade had won another day of life, and Thinrazada, her sister, spent another night in the bedchamber of the Sultan and the Sultana, Scheherazade. And early in the morning, just before dawn, she awakened and she asked Scheherazade to finish the story of the Merchant and the Genie. Now, Scheherazade went on. The merchant was prostrate on the ground, and the genie had raised his scimitar to lop off his head. And the merchant pleaded with the genie and said, "My wife and children, you know how it is if you have a son. I don't know how they'll survive without me. Will you please allow me to return home to put my affairs in order? And then I promise you that I will come back. I will come back and you can kill me." Well, the genie, he stopped. He let his sword down. He stood over the merchant and said, "How could I ever trust that you would come back?" The merchant said, "I give you my word. I will come back. But I need this time in order to set things straight so that my wife and children will be okay. It is a reasonable request." "And when will you come back?" said the genie. "Well, I will come back in 1 year and 1 day. I will be back right here at the fountain." The genie thought for a moment. He said, "Fine. Let it be so. Go your way, and in 1 year's time and in 1 day, return." The genie disappeared, vaporizing from his being into that cloud, and whoosh, it was swept away. The merchant stood up. He dusted himself off and recovered as best he could from what he had just been through. He mounted his horse and made his way home. And when he got home, his wife and children greeted him happily, as you might expect. They were glad to see him, but they could see that there was something troubling him. He was not smiling. His wife asked, "What has happened to you? What is going on?" He sat down and he told his wife and children what had happened. You can imagine all of them were sad at this point of time. There was crying, weeping, wailing. There was wishing for something other than what was about to take place. The merchant immediately went about setting his affairs straight. He paid off any debts that he had. He had slaves or servants. He gave them all their freedom. He set his wife up with his accounts so that she would be well taken care of for the rest of her life, and made sure that his children, the daughters, would have dowries, and the sons would be well taken care of as well, with property and lands. He put all of his business affairs to completion. And when the date came, he mounted his horse and slowly made his way back to the fountain in the desert. On the appointed day in the morning, he arrived at the fountain. This day he did not tie up his horse, but he tied its reins over its back. He sat down at the fountain, and he waited. Can imagine what must have been going through his mind, sitting there and waiting. As he was waiting, an old man came walking up, leading a hind. And the merchant took very little notice of him. But the old man stopped and looked down at the merchant and could see the concern on his face, saw his horse standing freely nearby, and asked, "My good friend, what are you doing here, and what has brought you to this place?" The merchant said, "What has brought me to this place? I will tell you. I will tell you. In fact, I can tell you so much about this evil place that is enchanted by spirits and genies." "Well, please do tell me," said the old man who was leading the hind. Well, the merchant began his story, and as he did, the old man sat down next to him so that he could listen with all of his attention. When the merchant had finished, the old man said, "I would like to stay here and see what happens." The merchant said, "Fine, please. You're welcome to stay." Well, the two men then began to chit-chat a little bit with each other, and as they were, another man appeared, coming down the road with two black dogs. And when he got there, he asked the two men how their day was going and what they were doing sitting at the fountain, what their business was. Well, the old man who'd been leading the hind, he told the story of the merchant to this new man who had come with the two black dogs. And when the man had heard it, he said, "I would like to stay and see what happens next." The merchant and the old man said, "Please join us." So he sat down as well and waited. And as the three of them began to talk, I will tell you that the merchant's spirit was lifted. His heart seemed somewhat lighter. But then, off in the distance, a third man appeared. And he, hearing the story as well, sat down to see what would happen next. Well, it wasn't much time after that, then that cloud came blowing across the desert that was the genie. This swirling cloud, and when it stopped, the cloud disappeared, and there, standing there, was the genie. He came striding up with strong strides to the merchant, and grabbed him by the arm and lifted him up and said, Now is the time for you to die. I will kill you as you have killed my son." The merchant did not protest, but the other three men did. They said, wait, stay your hand. Let this man live. In fact, said the old man with the hind, I have my own story to tell. My story, and my story of this hind which I have with me. And I will ask you, Geni, if once you hear my story, if you find it more marvelous a tale than any you have ever heard, then I beg you to relinquish at least a part of the merchant's debt to you for the death of your son. Well, the genie was like most, interested, always ready for something new. It wasn't like today where you can tune into any little screen and watch some video about who knows what, including stories about the 1001 Arabian Nights. It was a time when what was real. And when somebody had a story to tell, well, maybe it was good to stay for a minute and listen to it. The genie thought to himself, I have nothing to lose. This merchant is at my mercy. So he responded to the old man, go ahead, tell your story. And I will respond fairly. If I find it more marvelous than any tale that I have heard before, I will relinquish a part of the merchant's debt to me. He may live for a bit longer. Let us say a third. And with that, the old man began his story. And I will tell you that Scheherazade stopped her story right there. Now, Shahryar, having heard the story stopped, he'd been listening with great pleasure. He thought, okay, this is interesting. I would like to hear what's next. Scheherazade, he said, will you continue the story tomorrow? She said, yes, my lord, I will, if you will allow me to live another day. And if Dinarzela can spend another night with us. So in the morning, I might tell her the story as well. Shahryar agreed, and so it was settled. And the Grand Vizier that morning was relieved again that his daughter would live another day. Okay, we'll stop the story there. Join again to see what's next tomorrow.